Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of Rich Connectedness podcast. And I'm Dr. Shima Beigi, founder of Mindfulness Engineering and your ambassador of Rich Connectedness. And today with me, there are the amazing Jillian and Eric, founders of Reconnective Healing. And I would like to first thank you both for arranging this. I know how busy you are. And I want to say that our tradition is to give the floor to our guests by asking the big questions of who are you?
Does anyone really know? I mean, how do you answer a question such as, who are you? Which parameters do you put it in? Which box? I guess if you're asking from the perspective of what is it that we do, we could share that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're asking of who we are, we're like everyone is. I believe we are simply expressions of consciousness, of love, of whatever word we use for this amazing field of intelligence, whether it's God or another term. And we are expressions of, and really, in a sense, shapers of this atmosphere in which we exist. How would you answer that?
Yes, I would say when we think of ourselves as who are we as oneness, these are the beautiful exchanges that we have. We are part of an interconnectivity, the reconnective healing intelligence, or the bandwidth of frequencies that we are so familiar with. Energy, light, and information is a language. So we are teachers, and we are sharers, and we are galactic citizens of an emerging consciousness and an emerging humanity that we are consciously contributing to by sharing information and an exchange about our evolution with amazing people like you, Shima. And so if we're speaking, though, to the background of kind of what are our credentials, you might take a moment, Eric, and I will as well, just to share a bit about your background.
Well, we teach something called Reconnective Healing, which people ask me, where did I learn it? And I say, well, I didn't. I said, well, how did you find it? I said, I have a feeling it sort of found me. Because what happened was I had practiced as a doctor of chiropractic for 12 years. And as some people watching this interview may know already, but maybe many not, one night I had a few interesting experiences. I was awakened by the lamp next to my bed that turned itself on, woke me up. I had the lamp for 10 years. It hadn't done it before, but there it was. When I looked around the room, first I had a feeling that someone had walked into my room and rudely just flipped the light switch, except I immediately recognized no one was in my house to do that, even though it felt like someone was there. And I noticed that my bedroom door, which was closed when I went to sleep, was open, which made it feel more like someone was in my house. So I got up and I grabbed the largest knife I could get my hands on in case someone was there. I got my Doberman pincher, who hid behind me, and an old empty spray can of pepper spray just so I would look intimidating if I stumbled on anyone. Couldn't find anyone. After about 15, 20 minutes, I went back to sleep. I did notice something strange, though. When I went back to bed, I reached over to the lamp to turn that little knob that's on most every main lamp, and that little button, and it wasn't clicked on. And you see, I'm thinking, I'm a clicker. Everything clicks on, clicks off, doors are locked, windows are closed, toothpaste cap is on, everything's in place. And that knob was just rotated sufficiently to ignite the light bulb, but not clicked into place. I'm thinking, that's not me. I don't know who did that. That's not me. Anyway, I went back to sleep. On that Monday, when I went into my office, I would work on my chiropractic patients. starting face down, then I turn them over, finish up by the head, and I say, now close your eyes while you're lying there on your back and relax for a minute, let the adjustments settle in. And when the first patient opened his eyes, he looked at me, he said, who came into the room while I was lying here? I said, nobody, why? He said, no, like I didn't hear him. The person who came into the room. I said, no one came into the room. He said, I felt them. I said, no one came in. He said, I heard them. I said, no one came in. So we went back and forth and back and forth. And finally he said, okay, but you can tell when someone is just appeasing you. They really didn't believe what I was saying. And I thought, well, that's odd. I'd known this patient for a while, but all right, that's his experience. I went into the next room, adjusted the next patient. When I finished, she looked at me, she said, who came into the room when I was lying here? I said, no one, why? She said, the person I heard, no one, I felt them, no one. 7 patients in that day insisted someone came into the room, walked around, ran around, and 2 of them, and I tell you, these were regular grounded patients of mine that I'd known for a while. 2 of them insisted that it felt as if someone was flying around the ceiling. Other patients were telling me they were seeing colors they'd never seen, smelling flowers they'd never smelled. And people started getting up and demonstrating healings or telling me, calling me during the week about their healings. They were walking again, moving their bodies again, seeing, smelling kids with childhood diseases, or not just childhood diseases, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, were walking and running and playing and not needing their meds. Their doctors wanted to know what was going on. I said, what I did, I said, I didn't do anything and don't tell anybody. But the more I said that, the more people started talking. Soon scientists started coming to study this, and media started coming to study this, and people began to ask if I would teach it. And I said, you've got to be nuts. Teach this. I'm standing there waving my hands in the air, feeling strange sensations. I'm looking like a fool. You go outside, wave your hands in the air, let me know what your community says about you. But I finally agreed to teach a small group of people. I didn't even know how. How do I teach something I don't understand? So I shared the beginning of the stories. I allowed them to feel it in their hands. I showed them how I started to play with it and pull it and stretch it and allow the awareness to overcome. And the understanding that, remember now, I didn't come from any kind of a background of studying Reiki and Qigong and energy healing techniques where they teach you about sending energy and focusing in. So I came from what this, let's call it what it is, intelligence that was communicating with me, shared not verbally, but it became clear from the inside that what I was doing was standing and allowing it to find me, to receive. And in receiving, something was changing. I didn't understand it quite to this degree yet. Something was changing within me. And when it changed within me, because of my willingness to receive, not my ego telling me to send, but my willingness to accept and receive, it transformed, let's say for now, the space in which I was sharing with the patient of mine, because I was a chiropractor, not even thinking about this. And that space allowed for their transformation and their change. It was only much later we found that that space was not the room. That space continued outward and was not delineated or limited by wall or proximity or border or continent. And I'll go as far as to say it's probably not even limited by dimension. Our transformation seems to affect every proton and smaller within us. And if we listen to such wonderful researchers you may know of as Nassim Haramein and others, we find that it seems to affect every proton in the universe, and our transformation, our willingness to receive, accept, and be transformed, I believe, is, let's use the word responsibility, is our responsibility, because our expansion and transformation, I believe the universe's continued expansion is dependent upon that. But I don't have any opinions on the subject, of course.
Thank you very much for sharing this beautiful story. I have to say that I started to reading your book, which is very an interesting read for the audience. I highly suggest it because it really brings a human touch to the story, how you really discovered this gift. And also, I really like this attitude of yours throughout the book that is very childlike. You really insist of not knowing the source of this this divine force, if I can call it. If it is connecting us, I think it's really the fabric of life, that we're beginning to tap into this unity that we all share. So you explained about your willingness to set aside your ego. Did you have any practice prior to that to know how to set your ego aside, or were you like that? I think naturally, because some people, I think they have higher degree of receptivity, as in Vedic science, as they call it, to be able to be receptive to what is coming to you.
I will briefly respond to you that no, I had not had any experience with setting aside my ego, and most anyone that I've known will highly and vocally attest to that. No, I was not an ego-free person, nor do I think that ego is a mistake, of our natural design anyway. I think we're here to have ego to help us as a learning tool to keep it in balance. The problem is when it gets very big, and mine was. But standing in the presence of this huge expression of something new and something different immediately wipes the ego out of you, and all you can do is choose between turning and walking or running away out of fear, or stepping forward into it out of a willingness and awe and wonder to step into something far greater than you. That's a little bit of my background. Let's share a little bit about you.
My background comes from a really specific blend, I'm going to say, of environmental science, as well as I've had quite a bit of exposure to what we'll call the shamanic traditions. And that awareness of having spent a lot of time with what are now known as the 13 indigenous grandmothers around the world, and looking at the variety of ways that we interpret the mystical, the multidimensional. Where does it come from? And what's so fascinating to me in this moment is to note how now science has become so curious about these capacities that in some ways have always been really in the realm of what we can call a knowingness. The knowledge of the universe transposed, given to us through whether it's the informational system of DNA or the informational system of the teaching traditions, or those what we'll call very special people. This is now becoming a very different understanding, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It is a spectacular new era for us to recognize that each and every one of us is imbued with absolutely the same capacity to receive our worthiness, our healing, but to be a vessel of healing for every sentient human and every connective, we'll say, or reconnective form. Every membrane of the universe exists to be part of a receivership. And what Eric and I's cosmic collision, I think, was in some ways to marry the balance of the philosophies of when the universe reaches to us to tell us it is time to listen, to actively listen from another aspect of ourselves, another dimension of ourselves. This is an enormous revelation, and we are all exposed to these in our lifetimes. Sometimes they're shared, again, through the traditions of a lineage, maybe. Sometimes they are a quantum mechanic or an event like Eric really received in 1994, when this
93, but who's counting?
when this intelligence reached through what we'll call space-time. And it's fascinating to look at what does it mean when something greater than anything we can measure, everything that we can measure, has such a tangible force. And Shima, you had a reconnective healing session. I mean, part of what was very intriguing about doing this interview with you was that, and we do a lot of interviews and people are curious about what is reconnective healing, but what really captured my interest in looking into who you were and why to do this interview was that you had exposed yourself to often what we understand in the reconnective healing spectrum is beyond words. This is not a simple subject to just have a general conversation about. And so we loved that you had an experience
this morning.
You had an experience, and I think to kind of move forward in the conversation, we'd love for you to explain a bit about your own very distinctive and personal experience.
Yes, thank you. I mean, now turning the interview to me. Thank you. Yes, thank you. My interest with reconnective healing came through my background. I'm a resilience scientist, so I work with complex adaptive systems, which is a combination of physics, mathematics, engineering, and to some extent biology, and I think at deeper level quantum mechanics. So I came across your practice on Instagram, so I saw the account, I looked through it, and then I thought that I'm gonna give it a try, but I forgot it. But then on your website, I saw that you have different practitioners. I also have been practicing and searching about this higher intelligence for the past, I think, 15 years. I've done shamanic journeying. I'm a certified yoga teacher myself. I come from a mystical background. I have a lineage of basically mystics in my family, both from my father and mother's side. And I think I had my own revelations throughout my PhD studies, because I did two. The first one, in the middle of my PhD, I had a voice actually in my head that this is not for you, quit. And then it kept coming up for 3 days. And I think I was very logical at the time. I shared it with my colleague who was sitting next to me, and he said to me, look, you read into many things too much. Just do this PhD, finish it, and then you're better to become an artist rather than studying it. So I quit. Anyway, so I listened to the voice, and then I followed, really my life started to change. I encountered another man. He became my second PhD supervisor, and my life really changed. The trajectory changed, and it was a path opening for a combination of mindfulness and engineering, and the thing that I developed throughout my PhD. So I was a little bit familiar with this. We call it intangible force, but today I see it. But it doesn't lend itself with the eye, because I think the eye is very limited in the spectrum of receiving the magnitude of this infinity. So I really think there is this all senses, I think they have to kind of multiply each other one by one. So it becomes like a fractal sensory system to be able to see this invisible and visible at the same time force around us. So I came across your work, and I booked a session with a practitioner in Belgium. I went in, to be honest, I expected someone to be like a yogi or someone. I sat with him for a few minutes, I think 10 minutes, we just talked. It was very silent, very grounded man. I asked him, so what is your job? He said, I do reconnective healing sometimes. My main job is a lawyer. So I was shocked. I said, okay. I have never seen a lawyer that is so right-brained, you know, because I mean, of course, the brain is very interconnected, but the majority of these people that I know, especially in Belgium, they're very logical. So he said to just do nothing. So just allow and receive. That's it. It does its own job, and it heals whatever it needs to be healed. So don't focus on anything. And to be honest, at the time, I didn't have any, thankfully, no illness, just the heaviness that I wanted to basically not get rid of, but to understand what is the heaviness. So I went in a room, I lied on the bed that he prepared, a very basically simple room. Before that, going to the room, I saw, my attention was drawn to a photo of a really beautiful woman on the wall. I said, who is this woman? I said, is my wife. And something, it's like I went into the photo and came back, so very strange feeling. So I ignored it. But then I went to the room, I lied down on the bed, I closed my eyes, and he went up here. So because I kind of heard his footsteps. So he was here, he gave me energy on not energy, but he said, I'm not going to touch you. I'm going to be just around you. And I allowed the field to lead me where it needs to be present the most. So he stood up on my head, and I think around 10 minutes, it was a 1 hour session. After 10 minutes, I felt something enter to my back, like really spine. It was really, I'm kind of lifted up and really, really kind of held like this. And I felt really big, like really the feeling that I always I was trying to reach that feeling, I would say, with my degrees, with my education, with all of this decoration, like a Christmas tree that I was bringing for myself, and still missing that missing link. So when I'm sorry about the noise, I have this neighbor's a little noisy. So the feeling was so special that it's like really, I call it, that was the reconnection, because I was connected with something so familiar and at the same time so abstract, but I knew it. There was a deep recognition in me that this is it and this is the truth. What I'm looking outside is not the truth. So that really, it's really, really moved something in me. And then, regarding what you said, for example, in your practice, you would experience, your client experiences someone else present. I also felt like there are 3 people in the room, not 1 person, because he moved. I said, at the end of the session, I said, I felt there are many people in the room, especially 2 really distinct presence that are really close to me. But the really really distinct part of the session was that in the middle of, I think halfway through the session, I felt really a force, like really pushing my face toward left, and something lifted me up. So I sat kind of half raised on the bed, and I was locked in really a position of like this. And I was locked in this position, and my gaze, but my eyes was closed, my gaze was locked to the corner of the room. And I went into some really like a tunnel of light. But I went back into some, I don't know, time, I don't know what it was, but I saw a woman wearing like a dress, like a sari, Indian dress, I mean, I was about also to go to India, but that woman was dead. It was like someone, it was like I am just invited to see something, just to see something, because I was not allowed to do anything, just to see. And I felt that this woman wanted me to see her pain. And I sobbed, I think, in really like a hysteric kind of, because I saw that she's suffering from something. And there was a train station, so she was left. It was like a tribal trauma. It's like a genocide, like something like that, I think, happened. I couldn't really see what happened to her, but I saw the injustice. And she saw that I saw the injustice, because I think I feel what she wanted was only a pair of eyes, or maybe a presence to witness something. And that was my interpretation, was that it was a consciousness that needed to be recognized. And I was maybe in the vehicle of my own healing, or whatever, in the session or the room. Maybe it was not even for me, it was for her. It was like maybe she called me to do this, to experience this for her. Like I became a vessel through this man energy for her to also heal in the space. So my idea was like, it's like when you kind of tap on the surface of the water, you create a lot of waves. So I think in that moment, I think a generation was healed, I feel, or something was released in the space, because I cried. It is as if I am apologies. It was like I am being raped, or I'm seeing like a historic injustice. It was like slavery. I was seeing something so unjust that spoke to my heart so deep.
What was in it for you? What was the receiving that you also observed in the force that you witnessed of this intelligence? How would you describe it?
I think what I received was, first of all, I think my perception of healing is a little bit, I mean, because the subject of our talk is about healing, I think there is no such subject of my healing. That it's a very, I think, a limited perception of healing. Healing happens in layers of beings. And I think there is a need for a recognition of the energy. And I think what I received from that session was that, first, it was not about me. Second, that force that I knew, I mean, I could experience its interaction prior to that session. That session was really like I think a scientific experiment for me to see, yes, it exists. Because sometimes you want a double-blind experiments, or you really want to have this control experiments in the lab. I thought that I'm going to do it in my own lab, because I think there is no experiment stronger than the sense of basically a belief and really an inner experience that really proves that there is something. But what is that something? I still don't know, but now I know that it exists. And the third one was that we don't exist in our physical body. I don't think it's just exists in this realm. I think we are really a continuation of something that maybe we are beginning to discover. And why I say that, because on my journey to witness this woman, I don't know who she was, in train station, and she was, her skin like not dark, not black, but not white. Also, someone like Indian type, like Indonesian, like this kind of race. On the journey to witness, while I was kind of held like glasses, couple of like glasses to just look at her from this window, I saw a connection of basically the woman, the picture I saw in the living room of this man. I saw a man that said to me, I am her brother. Like basically, I don't know this person. I mean, I was total stranger. But my focus was held only on this woman. I could not walk away because this presence also introduced itself. So I felt that there is a brother, but I was moving. It's like a train. So it's like I saw that there are like lines of information, but I'm not allowed. It's like in this moment I have to just only see this.
You were the observer. You were the observer and the witness. And in reconnective healing, very often as a facilitator and as the client, we are given the privilege to be the observer and the witness. But before we started recording, you shared something with me and Eric about a particular aspect of something in the session that was very much for you. And you described it on a visual level, and you also described it in a way that it allowed it to speak to your personal freedom. Do you remember what you said to us?
About the energy or the electricity.
About the energy and what it reminded you of and what it left you with.
But first of all, it reminded me as like the question of, am I enough? I mean, I didn't know why I am there. I mean, my idea was I need to heal from something, and I want to heal because I feel a little heaviness. And I was going through a certain period of my life that I basically sold all my life because I knew that I don't know what I'm doing. So this is all not real. So I have to get rid of everything. So I was in a very special period of my life. So I thought that this might give me an answer. So the beginning of a session, when I felt the energy, and it really lifted me up, kind of like this. I felt like I'm enough because I was searching, but am I enough? This was the question, and like the empty spot in my puzzle. The question, am I enough? And yes, you're enough, but it's not about you. Also, it's like, it's like, for example, when you go to Nepal or Buddhist countries, you see the strings of these colorful flags, prayer flags. I think we are like that. We need to have an empty spot for this string of consciousness to really move through us and really kind of creates this interconnection.
Beautiful analogy. So beautiful.
This is a little bit about how reconnective healing got its name, in a sense. Because when this first began, people would say, all of this is being accomplished and there's no technique, because reconnective healing is here to free us from techniques. We don't have to worry about clockwise and counterclockwise and crystals and wands and all those fear-based protections and procedures, nothing. Instead, you become everything. And I said, it has no name. And they said, well, it needs a name. I said, no, when you give it a name, you create a box. It fits in the box, and everything outside the box is not it. And there are two things I clearly understood from the beginning. We didn't know what this was, and we absolutely had no idea what this was not. So a name didn't work. But you see, it's our desire to individualize, to own, to make about us that started taking over. And in one part of the United States, they started calling this Eric Pearl healing. In another place, they called it Pearl natural healing. Another place, they called it high frequency Pearl healing. Everything they felt had to have my name and had to have a description. And I really didn't want it to. And so I looked into a part of this experience that I was having that I wrote about in the book you read, but let's not get into that now because it's a whole other storyline. And I found, if we call it reconnective healing, if we recognize that this is a reconnection, it's something that can give insight and yet be without limitation, because we're connecting or reconnecting to an ongoing fullness, as you were describing. So it's not about us, and it is. It is the reason we call the book The Reconnection, Heal Others, Heal Yourself, and it could just as well have been Heal Yourself and Heal Others, is that it is an ongoing communication multidimensionally in all essences of existence and on all levels. And as we receive, as we have our healing and evolution, everyone else does. And the way that when Jillian and I teach these training programs and seminars, the first thing we explain is to observe, to notice, and to experience without attempting to tell it where to go or what to do, without intention. Instead, it's about attention and awareness. And in this, we realize that alone, we may have worthiness questions. But in this reconnection, the question of worthiness disappears because we find that we are everything and everyone. Even when we look at energy healing approaches from hundreds and hundreds of years ago to today, each one was focusing in through a different technique and a different portion of energy limited within our four-dimensional bubble of height, width, depth, and time. And that's why there are 300 whatever forms of Reiki and different forms of Qigong and this and that and the other. They're like potato chips. You want one, but you have to find something more. Reconnective healing allows all these, why don't we say, limiting membranes of the techniques to disappear, to expand into our existence within height, width, depth, and time, four-dimensionally here. And as it does that, our membrane of life and love, energy, and information expands out beyond the four dimensions, and we become one with everyone. It's sort of like little bubbles of carbonated water floating to the top of the ocean, expanding out and becoming one with the universe. So within this, the question of worthiness is no longer a question.
Also, it reminded me of a phrase that a very well-known spiritual teacher Thomas Hubel says, that the flower doesn't really care if the perfume reaches others, because the perfume is over there. So it doesn't really care about where the perfume or the essence of the flower lands. It just allows it to be, and the freedom of really discovering, I think the freedom of discovering our connection with this field, but also understanding our limitation with regard to this bigger field of life. I think this is the key point for me today, especially when we speak about the spiritual and scientific dimension of healing from trauma. I think what science is missing is this attitude of wanting to know everything and not being open to really different fields and mediums of healing, especially now that we're dealing with so many complex diseases such as cancer or Alzheimer's diseases, that I think they can benefit from this kind of medium. So what are your thoughts in bringing this vehicle of reconnective healing to basically mainstream medicine?
I think it's a very important question right now. And what you've just touched on about wanting and needing to know everything, and where science becomes the intersection of what we'll call spiritual science or we'll call quantum mechanics, is where we stand in this moment. The it in reconnective healing. What is it? What is the it? And what happens when we recognize that we are greater than what we'll call the thinking mind? The thinking mind has a very particular atmosphere. It's limited by a beginning and an ending. It is there to decipher and make known to us a beginning and an ending in any given, what we'll even call moment of space-time. So if the measure of how we solve a disease, or how we approach an imbalance, or how we look to resolve even, we'll say, depression, this idea of finding it through the mechanics of only how our thoughts dictate, how our emotions guide, is limited by the very premise or basis from which we are connected, and what we are connected to, that becomes, I'm going to say, the source of our healing itself. So the reconnective healing intelligence allows for something to occur that is a very unknown in this work. Part of ongoing studies that we're doing, we are beginning a new protocol in Leipzig, Germany, I hope next year, and we are looking at many facets of what we can't understand about the interaction, but something in the receiving of a reconnective healing expression bypasses the mind entirely. It has no capacity to understand the identity of a person, a story. It has no connection or interest in how it interacts with I'm going to say the client or the practitioner based on their known fact. Or so the very curious reveal about this intelligence is that it seems to intercede and architect something in the atmosphere of how we understand ourselves and our connection to everything, and leave behind, meaning it becomes greater than our capacity to be able to track it. It becomes greater than our capacity to be able to understand or make a conscious cognitive summation of what it is doing and what it isn't doing.
You see, what Jillian keeps saying, not intentionally, but I keep hearing, and we talk about this all the time, what it is doing, what it is not doing, it is. This it is. And what we can do, and all we can do, is observe it. And we catch glimpses and glimmers and understandings and interpretations that start to put itself together into this huge, beautiful picture. And we think, oh, now I get it. But you see, everything that we get is only this much into what's coming next. It's like we think when we ask a question, we get an answer, except the answer is never really an answer. It's just a building block that allows us to observe more, because it allows us to ask yet greater questions, to observe more in the what's going on. You know, you told a little story about this morning. You know, you had been reading the book and then you journeyed out into the world and some interesting things happened. And, you know, even when I was writing this book, this first book, and Jillian and I are close to finishing up one of our own right now, the editor would call and say, I can't edit this book. And I'd say, why? She says, every time I pick it up, my hand starts to vibrate, things start to change, because there's a communication in the energy which is not limited by voice. You will probably receive many interactions after people watch this interview, sharing with you what they were experiencing in feeling it, in changing during this and following it. As a matter of fact, Jillian and I are doing something for the very first time. We're going to be doing a live stream. You want to tell them about that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a live stream actually coming up from our training program coming up this Sunday, 2019, December 8th for 2.5 hours, I think, 10:30 Pacific Standard Time, and or 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, where we will be talking about the philosophy of the work, of course, but we're also going to be sharing about self-healing and how to access self-healing. And then we will, and teaching a little bit about it. And we will also be doing a distance healing where people watching will receive a distance healing. We'll bring you through a self-healing meditation first, then we'll see the distance healing. We'll interact with those of you who are part of it afterwards to hear about the experiences and share and download what's going on in the distance healing. It's going to be a very interesting experience because it's the first time ever that we're allowing eyes into what goes on in the Reconnective Healing Training Program. And we get to experience, and you'll get to experience, the limitless nature of this. It's as if we're here, we experience to the same level wherever we are in the world.
So there's a multidimensional force that we are interacting with the Reconnective Healing intelligence. But one of the things that I want to be understood here is that this interaction expands our capacity to receive. If it has one consistent attribute that we tangibly, no matter, I mean, we've trained close to 100,000 people in this work around the world. I call it the greatest silent civilization because it moves as an atmosphere. It doesn't move as a healing technique. It moves as an atmosphere just as the Holy Spirit moves. And in some ways, you know, and I should be thoughtful, I'm not making an association to any religious paradigm. There is no belief system in reconnective healing. There is science, but there is so much we don't understand. And at the same time, if I were to correlate the impact and freedom of what the movement of this intelligence is most analogous to, it would be that. It would be that we understand as this spirit that is greater than the atmosphere or any indicator that we embody, and has a capacity in one direction, receiving. There is not a sending in reconnective healing. We send nothing.
And yet in receiving, of course, it's from one perspective, it's linear because it's all about receiving. And simultaneously in receiving, we find that in all directions, the giving, the infinite exchange takes place. However, it is dependent upon receiving. So when we allow ourselves to be in observation and awareness of receiving, that's all we need to do. When we start descending, we start separation. When we receive, we become an embodiment of the whole.
Which leads us to your practitioner. Here you have a man by day who's a lawyer, and by weekend and on occasion, he facilitates reconnective healing sessions for people who reach to him. So what is the role of your practitioner in the room with you? What are the mechanics of the practitioner?
I think the practitioner was really a bridge.
Okay, articulate the idea of the bridge.
So for me,
I want you to think of your practitioner as a Bluetooth signal. Your practitioner is in awareness.
I think, you know, I mean, in fact, it was one of my questions, like before this question, was that, you know, it felt like, and you speak about the Holy Spirit. I think in all Abrahamic religion, there is the idea of the man is created in the image of God. And what I experienced, I think the closest I can say, it was like, okay, if this is God and this is me and I was here, so kind of he adjusted me, okay, now we're in the same mirror. So I think what is happening is like really a readjustment of the original, I think, the seeds, the potentiality that travels through this lifetime, and many, I think after this, because I think the potentiality and I think we call it soul or what have you, I think it travels. And I think I have in this time, this physical body to experience that potentiality in this lifetime. But as it travels, I think it needs to be remember where it comes from and where it goes. So because it really, for me, it was really a reconnection to a source of light. And I think my understanding is that we're coming from light. When we die, we go to light. But in between, what we do, we have to create light. Otherwise, I think it doesn't make sense. Because I think it doesn't make sense. You come from a light, like the source, and you go back to source. But in the middle, you're walking in the darkness. And I think tools, maybe like reconnective healings, and people, I think, that facilitate that, I think they remind us and humanity of the basically where we all come from, and the unity of creation. Of course, we're all unique, but I think with our uniqueness, it's the capacity to connect. And I think my practitioner was really like a catalyzer, I think, in the chemical.
Catalyst. That's
Perfect
exactly
word.
right.
That's
You're
the
so
word.
brilliant, Shima.
Share the light.
The catalyst is exactly the name of the program
Yeah.
that we.
Yeah, in chemistry we have like you have an equation in chemistry that is only one way. In order to make it a bidirectional chemical reaction, you have to put catalyst. Yeah. And that man, I think, was a catalyst.
I'm so very touched by the awareness that with someone as much experience and knowledge, I am going to say knowledge because you are, again, you have educated the mind as well as exposed yourself to so much, but your ability to be able to articulate this experience with the reconnective healing session and with that you experienced is so comprehensive. What if reconnective healing and this intelligence came onto the planet at the time that it did to be the most tangible, and I use the word tangible because you could tangibly feel something, correct? You could feel the pulling of your head.
Yeah, I mean, I felt that somebody is actually telling me, look at the other direction. I mean,
right. But it was a physical interaction as well, even though there was no touch.
There was something really lifting me up,
correct,
just holding me in certain direction. And I think if it was something like, I couldn't do it myself because I would get tired. But I was able to just look in this direction. I was supported because it was painful. What I saw was something, a generational, like intergenerational trauma was released at that moment.
And that to me is also the part that's new. If we now have the emergence of an intelligence that moves with the expansiveness of the Holy Spirit, that moves with our articulation, but yet is willing in this interaction to be so tangibly available that even our cognitive recognition can recognize it. It doesn't have to be a belief system. It doesn't have to be imagination. It doesn't have to be something that the mind will construct for us. Even a perception. It doesn't even have to be a perception. It can be so 100% tangible, beyond doubt, that we have this very beautiful opportunity to step into our life with what you regained, which was that I am enough. And it wasn't that it just architected that as a thought. It shifted every biophoton in every cell of your body. It reorganized and re-architected measurably that coherence. And I'm going to encourage you to expose yourself to have the personal reconnection. That's something you'll do once in your lifetime, or even one more session. I want you so much to explore this. I'd love you to be part of our study and being able to articulate what and how we can utilize this tangible expression at this moment.
So in your articulation, what you said I loved. You spoke about a fractal sensory system. I love that phrasing. Now, what brought that back to me was that we brought up the term catalyst. Now, in a fractal sensory system, we have what we call transsensory. I'm drawing a blank on the medical term for it.
Synesthesia.
Yes, synesthesia. Now, synesthesia is a very interesting concept. I don't like to call it that because synesthesia in psychology or psychiatry is often thought of as a problem that needs to be cured instead of understanding that it's an expansion that's desirable to move into. They're coming at it a little backwards here. And so what happens when you experience reconnective healing is you smell colors, you taste sound, you feel light, you see music, the senses cross all the time. And when we use the concept catalyst, I don't usually get into this, but I'm going to with you because you mentioned catalyst and you are a catalyst. The funny thing is, this is also a fractal sensory system in understanding a catalyst because catalyst by definition is unchanged in the process. But in this fractal awareness, we suddenly understand that, yes, you're a catalyst. You're more than just a conduit. I will say you're simultaneously a conduit. You're also a catalyst, but you're beyond the definition of catalyst because you are changed. You are transformed in this interaction. So if you don't mind, I will borrow your descriptive terminology of fractal sensory. I love that. As a matter of fact, there was an ongoing study done by a very established researcher on DNA, and they studied DNA that they intentionally damaged in the laboratory through high heat levels, causing it to unwind, to uncoil. And they allowed it to coil by itself slowly over time, one group. Other groups, they used energy healing techniques, which reconnective healing is not a technique, so it's a different approach. And third group, they did reconnective healing on it. They found that the techniques actually slowed the healing down than if it was left alone. Reconnective healing did two things. A, it sped the healing up, but B, it was the only approach that actually didn't just heal the scientifically intentionally inflicted damage. It healed the pre-existing damage in the DNA. It moves beyond the limitations of many approaches and of our approaches and our perception, as you described as fractal sensory awareness.
My perception is that, thank you very much for sharing that. My perception is that the field, or this, I call it guided consciousness, because I think it has a direction, and the direction is inclusion. I think my perception is that what it wants is that nobody is left behind. And it's a process of really acting very, very intelligently in the moment. So it kind of like a distribution of you know, the image that comes to my mind is like pieces of bread basically thrown into space, because I think we all need it. But the way that it distributes itself defies the logic that it doesn't matter if I am hungrier than somebody else. It knows who needs the most in that particular moment, but it also knows if it takes away something from my field, because I think the healing that I had in that session, I thought that it's for me, but I don't think that it was for me. I witnessed something, but I received something else a few days later that I knew that I was being remembered, that, okay, I took this space of witnessing from you, but I remember also. So I think the vehicle or the medium heals, but also it remembers. So it has this concept of basically, it registers, it has a memory, definitely. And it also invites us to, you know, it has its own economy, if I can call it. It's not like it has its own business. If I, you know, it's like, okay, it's not like €5, 10 euros, or $5 or $10. It has its own calculation, because it has a knowledge of a bigger picture that at any moment I have partial access to it. So I think a big part of this process of reconnective healing is to be open to receive what can be available in a moment, in that moment, particularly the collective moment that is created, geometry that creates. So for example, let's say in one moment we create a certain kind of fractal or geometry that creates certain type of coherence, but in another moment it's another type of geometry. But in any way, yes, please.
No, I was just going to say, so your healing is their healing is our healing. No one is left behind because there is no behind. The only behind that there is our perspective of behind by our own doubt, our feelings of separation, which goes back to contribute to our perspective of worthiness or lack thereof. And it starts not necessarily by bad intention, but it's contributed to as we start to direct the healing out of good intention. We think it should go there, and it should do this, and it should look like that, and we should intend this result and get the result we intend, which is the most we can get when we intend. And yet it's released, and we're freed to expand fully beyond that. When we realize to, instead of intend, to just have our attention on it and to take the ego out that intends, whether we intend by as one person or in groups of people, and know that it knows where to go and what to do. And everyone, including us, receives at the highest level when we go back to that state of observation without judgment.
Yeah.
And really, ultimately, in us becoming that one, becoming that unity, we experience ourselves as the essence of who we are, which is love.
And Shima, you will find that this experience will continue to unfold. One of the things we are also researching a bit is people who have received one session as early back as 1993 purport, again, a continuation of their awareness and attention in this sort of indescribable interaction.
That we're attempting to describe.
It is beyond, it's beyond our language. It is the language of multidimensionality. It is, reconnective healing is a language. And because it has the word healing in it, often the
we think of it as a physical change.
Yes.
A tumor goes away, you regain your range of motion, something else. But really, healing is so much beyond that. We limit the healing we allow ourselves to receive because our understanding of the word healing is limited to fixing something back to where it once was, instead of understanding that healing is our ongoing expansion and evolution, which is the purpose that we're here for. So our limited perspective of that term allows healing to only go. So we think of it as a return to this, a return to that, a return to the other, a return to wholeness. But we don't realize that wholeness is an ongoing expansion. So what it may be a return to in actuality is the existence that we are between dimensions, between lifetimes, outside of here. It's a return to something we've never experienced here.
Or continuing. I mean, maybe it is our evolution to live this multidimensionality. I am, from a scientific perspective, really certain that part of the evolutionary expansion of human form is to be able to embody that capacity, to be able to be in the expansiveness of what I might refer to as awareness, or the non-duality of what awareness itself is. In reconnective healing, this is the only state that exists for us to observe or be a part of. This intelligence is consistently exposing us from a perceptive point of view and literal physical biology to awareness. So that capacity to be able to be in recognizing the living in the frequencies of this intelligence simultaneously, while in a what we'll call actual time-based moment, something that we're crafting, or a PhD paper that we're working on, things that will have a beginning and an end, things that are imbued with the perception of a past and a future. Reconnective healing is that interrupter. It interrupts any recognition of past or future. It has no awareness of a past or a future. And yet it will continue to architect what is made available for each and every one of us. It continues to unfold that. We have to,
the non-linear unfolding instead of future.
Yes, we have to learn to know how to recognize it. And that multidimensional component is the language of reconnective healing that I think our focus is on. It is learning a language. It is learning this language.
It's, in a sense, you could say, it tells us to think again, recognition or recognition, and yet that's only the first step in recognizing that it is entirely beyond thought, beyond the thinking mind in which this occurs.
Thank you very much. Given the capacity of this, I don't want to say technique, this medium, I would say.
You can say approach.
Yeah, we call it an approach.
This approach of reconnective healing, have you thought about starting to work with victims of genocide or historical traumas that we have in our tree of humanity? Because I asked this question because I used to be a part of a program with spiritual teacher Thomas Hubel, who was running workshops of healing victims of Holocaust, basically healing from this the trauma, but also forgive and really basically be held in the space of being seen, heard, and recognized. So I was wondering if you have any future direction in really catering such, holding such spaces for people or other places even in the world.
I have some ideas I'd like to put into action, including whether it's something as time relative in a sense here of bringing this into the prison systems, or something a bit more expanded, which might be bringing it into where we have ongoing political and religious conflicts between nations, bringing groups of people together and working with either soldiers from multiple sides or people who have been experiencing genocide with the opposite sides, and accessing healing and facilitating and exchanging with one another, and yet within that, knowing that the intelligence of reconnective healing won't limit that healing to those two people, nor will it to this time. We don't need to try to send it to another time, future or past. It, as you use the example of the pond, you know, you drop a pebble, you touch the surface of a smooth pond, the ripples continue out non-linearly. What were you saying?
Recently I had a conversation with the head of AI technology who works with Mercy Corps, and they're dealing with what currently is the 3,000 most high-risk refugees in Iraq. And it's a difficult scenario because there is a very severe level of trauma specifically in the women's section and in the children's section of these communities. And they're using some very interesting, I'm going to say virtual VR intelligence and successfully to work with the way in which our memories have captured the trauma and release or provide a way, which is a technique, for those identities and traumas to be released. And I think there's a lot out there right now in VR intelligence to do that. This intelligence is something that is looking, I think, to establish an atmosphere. I keep using that word because I think really it is the membrane of humanity that we are really looking to reestablish. And because we are not a treatment, reconnective healing is not a treatment. It's
not treatment, it's not therapy, because it's not symptom directed or symptom related. It doesn't pay attention to the symptoms. It's like, I don't want to say it doesn't care. I want to say it cares so much that it doesn't care about directing towards the symptoms. It's just like it doesn't even care whether we believe in it or not, because it just is.
So we would love to be exposed to people who are, I'm going to say, committed to various different causes, that are interested in exploring the reconnective healing approach with their particular missions or purposes, but have enough clarity to express what this approach is there to offer, and not confuse people with what is a treatment or a diagnostic based approach. And trauma is an important one, because trauma is something that we do store in the cells of our brain and body. It becomes the biology of our behavior. And so I feel that this is a moment where the idea of taking mind to matter is very available for people.
And it's the willingness, yes, also the willingness of the people with these purposes, these missions, these focal points of attention in their lives, to say, I've been within my comfort zone in my interpretation and approach on this. Am I willing to open a door that might expand me beyond what I already know? You know, sometimes in our seminars and training programs, people often say, well, can you send a healing to this government or to this country? I said, well, for the first thing is, when you talk about sending a healing to a government, you're probably not really using healing in the truest sense of its word. What you're trying to do is intend a spiritual manipulation to get them to think like you. If we send healing, we don't have a focus on what the end result should be. So are you willing to allow for a healing that may come back and change your perspective as well as it may expand theirs?
I think that what you were given the awe and wonder to witness in your session, to be the witness and the observer of something that didn't belong to you, that wasn't yours to heal from, and yet you were given the capacity to become part of the equation of that woman's healing and your own. When we have trauma, in some ways, we are becoming the witnessed. And there is a difference between being the witness and the witnessed. Both pieces of the equation are an aspect of the membrane that God loved the universe, brought us into human form to understand with one another. That is the reconnection. That is the connection, so that ultimately we can exist in oneness for each other, both as the witness and the witnessed. That is where our healing ultimately becomes uniform. There is no separation. So let's continue this dialogue.
Yeah.
You are involved with so many movements and beautiful things. And again, you are one of the most educated, curious women I have researched, and I've done a little research on you. So we would be honored to collaborate in an area that you thought was very worthy. We'd like to expose you personally, I think, to a deeper level of your understanding of the Reconnective healing approach. And we have an opportunity perhaps to have you come and experience a full training weekend and maybe do a couple more sessions with you. We can do them via distance.
Thank you.
And yes, I think it would be excellent opportunity for us to explore the very beginning of the opening of this portal that you are stepping into right now. And it is greater than we can express. But I think that your knowingness is evident. And so let's just continue here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. With that said, I would like to ask you one final question. If we were to experience this space as a reconnective space for us and for others also, what would be the words that come to your mind? What would be the invitation that you have for others also to really start to become more curious, but not necessarily about different approaches to healing, but also to this unity of life, if you were to share?
I would say that it is the unity of life, that this intelligence is here in the Reconnective healing approach to establish finally, and to establish it in infinity and as infinity for us. Are we ready?
When you speak about with the different healing techniques and such, again, I go back to the visual of the bubbles releasing. I believe Reconnective healing is here to reconnect everyone and everything, including to bring together all of our healing approaches, freeing them and us from the limitations of the externals and the steps and the procedures and the fears, and allowing healing to be what it's about. Healing, it's, you know, we've all heard them say that religion needs spirituality. Spirituality doesn't need religion. It's the same with our healing approaches. Our techniques need healing, need to step into and exist in the freedom of pure essence. And that's who we are.
And receivership.
Love and receivership.
Receivership.
And receivership is what allows for that.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the audience for listening to this episode of Rich Connectedness podcast. And I would like to say goodbye.
Goodbye, Shima. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.